Morning everybody, today we're at Black Rock Sands in Widemouth Bay, up looking down at the sand dunes, and we're going to be considering a big question, which is why do scientists and specifically ecologists describe walking through the dunes towards the sea as going back in time, a journey back through time. So that's the big question that we're going to be thinking about on this stroll. In order to answer our bigger question about why this walk down to the sea is a journey back through time, we want to consider some smaller questions, like what can you observe as we walk down through the dunes towards the sea? And then, can you explain what you observe? Have you got any hypotheses to explain the changes that you might see?
Mr. Ryan, what's a hypothesis?
Hypothesis is an idea that you believe to be correct, and then you try and investigate to get evidence to support or reject your hypothesis.
Okay.
We also want to think about how could we make any measurements to generate data that might support or reject our hypothesis. When you're thinking about what data you would want to collect, how you would collect it, what you would measure, we've got to be thinking about those two R words, which is repeatability and reproducibility, to ensure we get validity in our results. So that's worth thinking about if you were planning an investigation, about how you could investigate what we're seeing as we walk from inland towards the sea. So now we can see the sea, we're close to the shore. I also want you to think about what key terms from the glossary at the back of your textbooks that you could apply to any aspect of an investigation that we undertake on the sand dunes. So think about all those keywords that you can use. We're tying in all sorts of different aspects of the specification just on this short walk, and thinking about what we could do as far as fieldwork goes and ecology down here at Black Rock Sands. So hopefully we observed on the walk down from inland towards the sea that the communities change all the way down. And what we can do is do some field work to see how those communities change. So again, we'll be talking about line transects. We could also do some random sampling to measure biodiversity. But it's the change in the communities that's important. So what we'll be talking about today is what's called succession. So here we are actually on the sand, and there's no organic material here at all. There's no plant life at all. It's an incredibly hostile environment, very, very salty. You might get immersed in salt water, exposed to the wind, no soil. What will happen is we have a prevailing wind direction from the southwest. The sand will be blown up here, and any little obstacle, like this piece of driftwood that I'm covering now, will make a small lump. That's what we'll call the start of a dune. That's an embryo dune. So over time, the wind will keep blowing, predominantly from the southwest, blowing sand up that embryo dune. It'll fly off the peak of the dune and land away from the lee of the dune. So you'll get a little hollow, and then you'll get a second dune starting to build behind the first one. And that process will continue. Sand will keep on piling up, keep on piling up. What that does is make a little shelter in the lee, and we start to form sand dunes with microclimates where some very hardy plants can get a foothold. We'll call those pioneer species. So we're going to see if we can find some pioneer species now, the first plants that manage to grow in this hostile, very salty, very dry environment. So we've got the first pioneer species that we've got in these dunes. It's called sea couch. It's not marram grass. We'll look at marram grass in a minute. Lots of people confuse the two. But a first one we see. It's much shorter, it's much softer, it won't spike you like the marram grass will. And this is a xerophyte. It's got xerophytic adaptations, and it's also a halophyte. It's incredibly resistant to salt. And nothing else can really compete with this. It's pretty much the only thing growing on the start of the dunes. But what it does is its root network will solidify the dune, make it more stable and stop it moving. However, sand will keep blowing over it and it might get covered up, and because it grows so quickly and reproduces and disperses its seeds, hopefully more will start growing in the vicinity. So it doesn't have much competition, but it's ever so hard to survive in this hostile environment. Here we have the most famous dune plant. This is the marram grass, very, very spiky. It can spike you in the eye, it's quite sharp and dangerous. And because of the time of year, it's the end of June, coming into July, it's actually flowering. So the marram grass is now growing. Now people think of these as long cylinders. If you pick a piece, it's actually a leaf shape that's just all rolled up. And we can look at the xerophytic adaptations of that, why that might be. That's something for you to think about. But what's so incredible about marram grass is the speed at which it grows. It can be covered by up to 1 metre of sand a day in a very windy place, and it can keep pace with that level of growth. So it can grow up to 1 metre a day with this pointy spike at the top to keep it above the level of sand. Not only that, it grows roots ever so deep and very quickly. They can't reach the water table, but when it does rain, sand being very porous, they can soak up as much of that water as they can on its way to the water table. Very, very deep roots, much more stabilisation of the dunes, and also we've now got plants, which means we attract insects, we attract some animals. Maybe there's some droppings, the plants die, some of the animals die, and there's droppings. So there's more organic content. We've basically got a much more stable environment that more species can survive in. Very few environments in Britain and the world really are unaffected by humankind. We cannot let this dune system mature as it wants to. So we interrupt the succession that's happening here. And what we can try and do to stop the dunes disappearing is trap more sand, keep the dunes stable in front of the beach. Because the dunes want to migrate backwards. So at Widemouth, not every year but periodically, Christmas trees are collected, brought down to here, embedded into the dunes, and they'll trap sand and have the formation of a dune here to stop the dunes from retreating too far towards the road and village. So just here, where this dune's been eroded by the wind blowing through, also it's a busy tourist beach, there's lots of footfall, and this dune's quite heavily eroded. But what we can see as a result is just how deep and intricate this root network is, and this is what's tying together this whole dune and making it less sandy and more soily and better able to support more biodiversity. Okay, so now we're moving up the dune a little bit. We've got a very stable dune here. It's actually what we call a yellow dune. So we started with the embryo dunes, no plant life at all. Then we had the fore dunes. We've got some sea couch there, the pioneer species. Then more fore dunes, but higher up, further back, further inland. And we've got the marram grass, making a much more stable environment. Now back here, it's more stable again. And we can see that the sand has changed colour slightly. So this would still be a yellow dune. As we move further inland, the sand will become darker and darker. We'll get to grey dunes, and finally we won't be able to see the sand because it'll be so covered in vegetation. Now each of these stages in a sand dune succession is called a seral stage or a sear, S-E-R-E. And those sears are characterised by the species that can survive there. So we've had embryo dunes, fore dunes, now we're in the yellow dunes. These are all different sears in the succession of sand. Moved over from the yellow dunes, we're now looking at the grey dunes here. It's probably the most biodiverse area. You can barely see the sand, plants everywhere, all sorts of different species. Obviously we can monitor them with our quadrats and our transects, interrupted belt transect, maybe some random sampling of each zone in the sand dunes. And when you get to the grey dunes, you might get low-lying bits, and in those low-lying pieces of the sand dune system, like over here, you might even get a marshy area. And that's really good for the wildlife and therefore the biodiversity, because we're going to attract amphibians as well as insects and small rodents, all sorts of things. Tadpoles, frogs, toads, newts, they'll all be down there. Now we're well into the grey dunes. We've got grass growing. We've also got shrubby trees, bracken, bramble and hawthorn, blackthorn, all sorts of scrubland species. Now what we've got here is that's where our dune system stops, but that's due to human impact. We've got the road and the village. If this were allowed to keep on succeeding through its serial stages, we would eventually get to an oak woodland. And that would be true of almost any habitat in Britain. So generally we've got farmland that stops the succession getting to the oak woodland. Even if it was an inland area, it would still end up being an oak woodland. That is the climax community for the UK. If you go to some rural parts of France, you can still see oak woodland everywhere, which is what Cornwall would have looked like many years ago before agriculture and urbanisation. So what we've got is interrupted succession, or the succession has been deflected so that this is as far as it's going to get. So we would call this scrubland a plagioclimax. It's not the climax community, that would be the oak woodland, but it is a plagioclimax because human intervention has prevented the succession going any further. Reached the plagioclimax of the Black Rock sand dune system. It's a very small sand dune system. There's one at Summerlees that you can go and look at. You'll be able to see the succession through the serial stages, the different seers, starting with pioneer species, then more and more different species, increasing biodiversity as you go inland. But at Summerlees it gets interrupted by the town of Bude. If you go down to Penhale, huge sand dune system. We can see a lot more species there. But best of all, if you go up the coast to North Devon and see Braunton Burrows, you can park in a mixed leaf some oak woodland and you can walk about 3/4 of a mile across the dune system through all the different stages, from the climax community right down to the embryo dunes where there is only sea couch growing. Today we've been looking at succession on a sand dune. It's called primary succession. Primary succession because our starting point is no organic content at all, no life at all. So bare sand, that counts as primary succession. Another example would be a volcano erupts, spreads lava, the lava solidifies, and you've got bare rock. And from there, that would be colonised. So this is primary succession from no organics, no life at all, right up to a climax community and all the different stages, serial stages of seers in between.
Okay. Mr. Ryan, this is good for us, our geography A-level and GCSE students as well. What about secondary succession?
So secondary succession, the same principle. The communities of life will change as you move through time. What's so good about a sand dune system is all the seers are present at the same time. But any patch of ground will go through a succession, but you would have to take a snapshot in time to see that. So an example of secondary succession would be if you clear a woodland and there's bare soil, maybe there was a forest fire, but there is still soil there, there is still organic content. So secondary succession, you're starting from there is already some soil. That's the key point. There's already some soil, some organic material, some humus. Which is organic material that soil's based on. If it's really fertile soil, there'll be more humus, which comes from dead and decaying material or feces, other organic content that's been put in. Your garden lawn, if you keep it well mowed, like I know Mr. White does, he probably even colours it in with some dyes,
Yep.
Is a great example of a plagioclimax. He stops it succeeding. My lawn is a little less well kept, more like a meadow. Far more biodiverse, lots of insects, bees, butterflies, all sorts. And if I just let it blossom, it would eventually turn into an oak woodland. But I keep it at the meadow stage. Mr. White's very much at the monoculture grass stage. But both are examples of plagioclimaxes. Today has been intended to make you think about primary succession and the case study of a sand dune system that's in the specification. I'd like you to walk through a sand dune system and be thinking of that big question at the start. Why do ecologists say it's like walking back in time as you walk from inland to the sea? And how could you measure species abundance, species distribution, biodiversity, changes in communities as you go up through a sand dune system? But also, succession happens everywhere. We're either talking about primary succession, secondary succession, sears or searal stages leading to a climax community, or if the succession's interrupted, to a plagioclimax. So those are the key terms and the key concepts. Good luck looking into them. So here we are at the very top of our dune system. We can see the scrubland, our plagioclimax stop just here. We've got the road, there's a human placed break, and then we've got the grass here, another plagioclimax that is regularly mowed. There'll be a follow-up sheet on Show My Homework for the different key stages. So thanks for listening, talk soon.